The Spin-Off Podcast Network. Ready to rediscover the joys of cycling? With over 300 kilometres of cycle paths across Tāmaki Makaurau, jumping on your bike and going for a ride is such a fun way to discover the city from a different perspective. Cycling is getting more and more popular across Auckland, so now's a great time to join the hype and give cycling a go. Head to at.govt/cycling to find your nearest cycleway today.
The Fold is brought to you by O Media, making brands unmissable and public spaces better across Aotearoa. No mai hoki mai ki a The Fold. E mihi nei ko Duncan Greive tōku ingoa. My guest today is Todd Niall, and you know I'm not welling up, but I am kind of emotional thinking about it. Todd is the sort of Auckland reporter for Stuff, but before that, and has been brilliant. Really agenda setting, and he has a real kind of sense of history and scope, and knows exactly how to do that really difficult job in a way that almost no one else does. But before that, he spent 33 years at RNZ, a good chunk of it reporting on Auckland for Morning Report. So for a particular generation of people who grew up listening to that show, this was the guy who told them what was happening in the city. And he talks in this podcast about, the amalgamation of the various, like the district councils into the super city, and for example the Len Brown era and the sort of scandal that ultimately broke his political career. He's just a person who he came out of journalism school in 1977 into the Auckland Star, and has sort of seen all of these eras of journalism, and we sort of talk through all that, but and about some of the characters that he's encountered, particularly Wayne Brown, with whom he has. It's not an antagonistic relationship, because you'll hear Todd is perhaps the least antagonistic person you could ever imagine, mild-mannered to an almost comical degree when you think about what the personality on the other side of it is. But Wayne Brown certainly has got a problem with Todd Niall, doesn't give him interviews, sort of briefs the opposition and not him. All of the classic Wayne Brown playbook that we've come to know. It's really extreme when it comes to Todd Niall, and so we drill into that, but largely this is about his career, about changes in journalism, about his time at RNZ, and also why he ultimately left there. I think it's a really fun, interesting, reflective chat, and we with Todd's last day at Stuff, the whole of journalism is a little bit poorer, because that kind of lifelong, dedicated beat reporter with a huge sort of contact book and a particular approach, it's just much harder to do nowadays. Even if people had the sort of aptitude and the will for it, the newsrooms just get chopped and people get moved around far more than they used to. And so this is on some level a love letter to the beat reporter, and hopefully will be instructive on the value of that. This is Todd Niall from Stuff on The Fold. Denakwe, Todd Niall, welcome to The Fold.
Morning.
I wondered if you could start. I mean, it's such a privilege to have you on your last day in this trade to which you've given so much. But I wondered if we could go back to the very start of your time in journalism, and then sort of talk about how you came to fix on Auckland as a place that you thought you'd like to cover.
I came into journalism through what was then called ATI, now AUT, the Auckland Technical Institute. It was in 1977, and they had a certificate of journalism course. $180, 18 weeks, was pretty focused, shorthand typing, basics of story writing, couple of field trips, and out you went into employment, and I went from there into the Auckland Star, the evening paper in Auckland, as a cadet, doing the things that cadets do, the shipping column and what have you.
How big was the Auckland Star at the time? Like, what kind of describe the newsroom as you found it?
Oh, it was, a big open plan. It was a big, noisy, busy place. This is the rows of journalists down each side of the building. There was sort of a long island down the middle. Across one end was where all the sub-editors and those people worked from. There was a semi-soundproof room in one corner where the great teleprinter machines chatted away all day, bringing in news from around the world. And of course, this is the era of the typewriter. So there's, dozens of typewriters going. There's old-fashioned telephones ringing. Pretty exciting kind of environment for a young journalist to be in.
Roughly how many people would have been on the newsroom floor, or working as journalists at that time?
I'd have to do a mental picture and try and count. I mean, there'd at least be dozens, more than dozens, including the bench of sub-editors who did everything from the front page to feature sections and that kind of work. Sports, art. There was an editor for what was then NZPA who would take the copy from that newsroom and sort out what should be syndicated around to other newspapers around the country.
It's just a window into a very different and in a lot of ways more sort of vibrant, competitive news environment to the one which we operate today. And I guess we'll probably touch on some of that path. What about Auckland? How long did it take you to sort of wind your way to going, actually, this place and is something that I'm going to spend a lot of my career scrutinising?
So Auckland wasn't a deliberate choice. I mean, I am a born and bred Aucklander. As a kid, we travelled around a bit, had a few years in Palmerston North, Wainuiomata, back to Auckland again. So Auckland just was my home. That's where I did my journalism training. I got into, the big daily newspaper, the Auckland Star, and in those days, Auckland was not, in terms of local government, what it is now. There were just dozens of boroughs. There was Auckland City Council, and the boroughs were everywhere.
We're right next to the
you're
Mount
in the
Albert
building.
City Council.
Yeah, Mount Albert Borough, Onehunga, Glen Eden, Howick, Newmarket, you name it. And so council reporting was much more of a staple then, I suppose, for newsrooms. And so, I started getting involved with those boroughs mostly as the more senior people did the big end of town, the Auckland City Council and the Auckland Regional Authority. And so, I don't know, Auckland, it was probably decades before Auckland became a specialty, if you like. Again, as I worked through my years, I worked in other centres and did local government reporting in those, Hamilton, Palmerston North, a stint or two in Wellington. So I got quite interested in that decision-making process in city councils, and eventually when I came back to Auckland, for a reasonably continuous stint, I spent more time doing council stuff there and kind of got into, the big decisions and the issues that would go across a council table.
I mean, it's a sort of a truism, which is obviously much more complex than than the statement might suggest. But there is this idea that local government is not interesting to people, and that it therefore is not well covered enough. And as someone who has spent a lot of your career there, why do you think that is, or what's the sort of counter to that?
Yeah, I kind of feel that that's sort of a misconception in that people are really interested in the stuff that local government does, but perhaps not local government itself. For example,
Sure.
what do people talk about in Auckland? Housing, transport, the bus system, the bus is late, what's happening with the trains, why is housing so unaffordable? And part of that is due to planning decisions of the past and being addressed by planning decisions now. So I guess a lot of people don't necessarily see local government itself as being something that's interesting, but I think that's up to us. People do get really excited about transport stories, for example, cycleways. They're passionate for and against, and all of these really are the domain of local government. So yeah, I think it's probably got a bad rap, local government.
I agree. But do you think, because it's interesting, like to me, the press gallery is probably the last almost properly resourced beat in New Zealand, where you have a lot of people. It feels like the big stories get hit, that there's significant competition, and therefore the characters and stories feel very kind of national and urgent, almost to the point of sucking up oxygen that could be usefully deployed elsewhere. Do you feel like local government, were it to have, there are, yourself, Bernard Orsman, Simon Wilson, it's not like it's an empty beat by any means, but there isn't, if you had the volume or even of a proportional share for Auckland size, do you think that council would change, that people's relationship to it would be better understood, not just the things it does, but the people who make the decisions that flow down into those areas?
Yeah, I guess the thing with the press gallery is that is a recognition by media organisations that this is a thing of great importance and it needs to be resourced, and each of them need to, put resources in there to cover it well. I think in Auckland's case, particularly with the creation of Auckland Council, now having this one mega council and the big agencies and the ability to really deal with big problems, I think it still it is reasonably well resourced. You've talked about people who are there. The Herald being a daily newspaper, although most of its readership, I guess, is online, still has that traditional focus on big Auckland politics. And for stuff, even though we're now largely a digital website, I mean, I've been fortunate enough that they've left me to, mess around in that patch, if you like, and others will follow me in that. But I think probably more resources could go in there from media organisations, and I think we're entering a period where there's quite a lot of big stuff that's going to happen that probably does need to be explored at least as closely as it is now, if not more.
Yeah, I mean, you think about some of the tensions and the scale of the projects which Auckland is approaching, and the numbers involved, the number of people they impact are easily comparable to the sort of stories that come out of Wellington, but there isn't the same sort of volume of people. Therefore, that they, do you think that important stories get missed? Do you see them sort of go by, and you think if we had a team rather than me, we'd be sort of on that, or that,
I think there are important stories that could do with more attention, and I think the city, this is one I think that will come to the fore over the next year, is the city's commitment to climate change action. And in a lot of respects, this is a turning point for Auckland Council, I guess, from its commencement in 2010 to where we are today. It's all been onward and upward. There's been more done every year, and it's moved ahead. But now with the fiscal pressures that it faces, things are going to be cut. There's some really big decisions and tough decisions that are going to have to be made about what falls by the wayside and what goes ahead. And I think climate change is at the risk of being, climate action is at the risk of being one of those things that will be put on the back burner, which I think would be a huge step backwards for the country and for the city. And I think how that debate unfolds through the deliberation on the council's 10-year budget over the next 8 months, I think will be a major one. And I hope people will engage with that and realise it's not about a bunch of councillors, but it's about really big decisions about their own futures and what their own Auckland will look like that are going to be decided.
Kia ora, ko Duncan Greive tōku ingoa. I'm just taking a little break to talk to you about a big project that we've got coming next year. It's called What's Eating Aotearoa, and it is going to be a very long-running exercise in 2024 where we look at food and what its role is in our society in a really kind of broad and multifaceted way. It's going to be deep. Like we're doing long form. We're spending a lot of time with this stuff, because it is so central to our lives, and this commodity, which this country makes so much of, has become really expensive. It sort of really impacts people's lives. It's a stressor. It's also a source of joy and culture. And we have always kind of published a bunch on food. Next year, we really want to make it a huge thread that runs throughout the year. To do that is going to cost us money, and there's a huge amount of resource that goes into a project at the scale that we're envisaging. And as a result, we're doing a Pledge Me drive. It's only the second one we've ever done, and the first since 2016. And we're asking for money from our audience. So if you're a member, would love it if you could give us a bit more. If you're not, this is an awesome way to sort of support the spin-off, even if you can't do so regularly, maybe chip in here. The really cool thing is that it's not just you don't just give, you also get. There's a whole array of different kind of rewards on there, some of which are already sold out, one of which is as a podcast hosted by me, which can totally be like a corporate thing too. It's kind of a bargain if you view it that way. So, basically there's a whole bunch of different rewards. They're really, really fun. They're extremely spin-off. So if you go to the spinoff.co.nz/pledge me, you'll be able to kind of see what it is we're about and what you can get for your money. I think as of writing, we're roughly 60% of the way there, but to get that last push, because the whole way Pledge Me works is you either get everything if you get to 50 grand, or you get nothing if you don't. If you're a regular consumer of the spin-off, you're probably sick of hearing about this, but we're going to keep talking about it because we are desperate to do this work. And as of right now, we aren't at that number. I know it's a really hard time, but if you've been sort of wavering or thinking you'll get to it, please, run, don't walk to a digital device and see if you can make a pledge to support us to do this. So that's the spinoff.co.nz/pledge me to help support what's eating Aotearoa. In terms of stories you've covered, during that time on the broader Auckland beat, can you pick a couple which sort of stand out in terms of really feeling significant in terms of their sort of scope or dynamics?
I know it's going to sound really nerdy, but I think the amalgamation process, which created Auckland Council in 2010, was, for me, was a pretty important moment, because there were the 8 councils before, and some were doing really good things in their part of town, but they disagreed on stuff. The mayors, there were personality differences. There was a lot of squabbling and indecision and court actions, particularly between the old city councils and the regional council. And I think the decision to create one single council, to give Auckland one unified voice and a scale that it can get on and do big stuff that it couldn't previously agree on, felt like a moment where the city had really grown up, and that we weren't a bunch of politicians all trying to lobby the government for their view on things to prevail. So that, I think there are people who say it wasn't perfect, and it wasn't perfect, and there are still things that aren't right with it. But I think that was a really big historic moment for Auckland, and to see that happen and what unfolded after that was, quite a big thing to be a part of. At the minor end of the scale, other big ones that came out of that, I guess, was the downfall of Len Brown, the revelation just after his re-election in 2013 that there'd been an extramarital affair with a council intern. That felt like kind of the end of the honeymoon period, if you like, for the council. There was a lot of loss of trust, I think, around the council table, and a lot of big things did happen in that next term. The creation of the unitary plan, the upzoning of Auckland, but it felt like a bit of momentum went out of things. And really, Len Brown probably, as the inaugural mayor of Auckland, probably should have had another good term. I think there would have been, he was the one who basically negotiated the City Rail link. He had big ideas and big visions for Auckland, and probably could have done another term.
It's interesting, right? Because that story, correct me if I'm wrong, came out of, was it whale oil? Like it came from a place which didn't exist, probably 10 years earlier. And I can't imagine that Len Brown's the first person to have an extramarital affair while in the mayor's office. It would probably not have been considered news when you started your career. And yet it became such an enormous and destabilising event. How do you think that was sort of litigated in public? What was your perception of it?
You're right. It was brought to the fore by people who were looking for political gain, and we're trying to get it out before Election Day on 2013 for an obvious outcome. But it came out just after the election. There were calls for, Len Brown to resign. There was, the front page of the New Zealand Herald was devoted to that call. There were elements that I think that did warrant public scrutiny. There was the question about how, for him and his own family, how hotel rooms had been paid for, when they'd been in town. There were nothing particularly wrong was found there, but it did prompt scrutiny that I think was appropriate at the time. And there was also an awful lot of scrutiny of the motivations of those who brought it to the fore and seemed to be involved in trying to get the most out of it.
Yeah, which is probably appropriate too. So yeah, in some respects, for it's a very strange story. It seemed to be covered reasonably well. Another thing which is, or certainly there's a perception that the relationship between media and our elected representatives has changed and has sort of decayed, particularly in recent years, and we'll get to some sort of specific examples of that later on. But do you believe that's true?
I haven't encountered that really at Auckland Council level. It may be something that happens at the higher levels of central government where there's a lot more media management and a lot more gatekeepers to key players like cabinet ministers. But despite the scale of Auckland Council, the councillors really are on their own in their relationships with the media. They don't have executive assistants, they don't have gatekeepers, they don't have their own media advisors. So you can have a pretty straightforward and direct relationship with any of them if they choose to. And my experience has really been that they are all pretty open and straightforward people. You might not always agree with them, but they're accessible in a way that's really quite appropriate.
There's a theory around that news reporting has got more opinion in it, and that news reporters are more regularly venturing opinions, whether it's within publications or on social media, and that has sort of impacted some of the sort of levels of trust between elected representatives and media. Is that something that you've observed, or do you think that has been an element that's risen in your time? There
is a lot more opinion in the news media, and there's that sort of grey area. It's sort of semantics really. Is it analysis or is it opinion? And I write stuff every week, a column every week, which we now call analysis. I try to walk a line in that between an opinion and using it to highlight, a particular direction that something may or may not be going in. But there is a lot of pure opinion. You look through websites and newspapers, there are pages of opinion columns on things. And, you can read them or not read them. I don't read most of them because there's still enough news stories to read. And really, if politicians want to read them, that's fine. If they disagree with them, disagree with them. But, I suppose it's only a media version of what people talk about in bars and things like that. So there is more of it. I don't know that it's displacing good news coverage really, but, it's there. Take it or leave it really.
The Fold is brought to you by O Media, making brands unmissable and public spaces better across Aotearoa, with over 4,000 out-of-home advertising sites nationwide across both street furniture and retail centres. I'm super grateful to O Media for enabling us to make unmissable connections with Kiwis.
Skinny are helping you show how smart you are with the 1Q quiz, an all-new, super challenging and super quick daily quiz built by the Spinoff. Every Monday, Skinny are giving you the chance to prove you're smart with the Skinny Extra Credit question. Get it right, and you'll get the chance to score yourself some Skinny Extra mobile credit, so you can text, call, or even video call your group chat and gloat about how big your brain is. T's and C's apply.
I want to take a little detour right now to the trekker, which is I feel like an object of enduring fascination for you, and also something that a bunch of people listening might not even know what it is. Do you want to just tell me what the trekker is and why it's kind of you've been so fascinated by it?
Right. So the trekker for me started as a 1-hour radio documentary a couple of decades ago and has now become quite a big part of my private life. The trekker was a motor vehicle that was designed and built in New Zealand in 1966, and its claim to fame is it's the only mass-produced motor vehicle that we designed and built in New Zealand. It wasn't a great thing. It looked kind of like an undernourished Land Rover, and it was built on Skoda mechanicals from what was then communist Czechoslovakia. The fascination for me, and I think its interesting place in New Zealand history, is it's kind of the ultimate manifestation of the politics of New Zealand in the 1960s, when the government controlled everything. The government regulated imports, the price of things, the motor industry particular, because bringing in cars was a big consumer of overseas funds, and the government wanted to make sure we didn't spend more than we earned and all that kind of thing. So new cars, you couldn't just buy them like you could now. You had to go on a waiting list. For a popular car, you might wait a year till you got to the top of the list. There were all sorts of side games if you had overseas funds. And some cars you could sell a year later for more than you bought for them. So it was a very weird world for the motor industry. And through this, the ultimate manifestation of government policies which were trying to encourage more and more New Zealand content in the cars that were built here, upholstery, glass, paint, all that kind of thing, came the trekker as it was the thing that made New Zealand a part of the car building world for a few years. And, it faded away quickly once everything started to relax. But I just found it, not just about cars, but it was a fascinating tale from a New Zealand that doesn't exist anymore. And as life's gone on, it's taking on a new life now in Europe, in the Czech Republic, where car maker Skoda is based. They have discovered it as an interesting part of their history. So it's sort of a thing that started off as a bit of a joke, but there are more and more kind of slightly global elements to it which fascinate me.
And so my first encounter with you and your work was on RNZ, where you did this terrific reporting often on Morning Report. Would hear you there. It felt like most days, and you seemed to be absolutely in your element. What did you enjoy about your time with RNZ?
So I had 33 years at Radio New Zealand. I started in the regional newsroom, the Wellington newsroom, to one side of the big newsroom in Wellington, if you like, doing local body stuff there. And then in the days when Radio New Zealand also had the commercial radio station arm, I was chief reporter in Tauranga, came to Auckland. In different ways over all those decades, Radio New Zealand was like the ultimate play sandpit, really, to play in. You could do anything. I got to do, local government politics. I got to do presenting, had the opportunity to make radio documentaries of my choosing, like the trekker one, which turned into be something that sort of has stayed with me for the rest of my life. And it also had an amazing culture. It had a staff who kind of felt that they owned the place and they were there for the audience, which was a pretty good thing to be involved with. And there were people from the music department. So really it had everything that either just in journalism or in broadcasting that you would want to be involved with. I got to present a summer series called Summer Report for a few years, which was kind of, I suppose, my happiest place there because it was a program that you could do anything in, from hard news to fun. And I sort of imagined that I would spend the rest of my working days there, but didn't quite make it.
Can you talk about that? Because I think everyone listening thought that too, and then suddenly you weren't there and you were at Stuff.
Yeah. So 5 years ago, I got a call from someone at Stuff saying my name had come up in a conversation for a new job, and I said straight away, look, thanks very much, but, I'm a Radio New Zealand lifer, and, put the phone down and started to think, well, at that stage I was 60 and starting to think, hang on, how many opportunities are you going to get if you had to go somewhere else, still do the things that you're passionate about? Without getting into the gory details, I had a new manager and change felt like it was in the air. So I had a conversation about the choice that I was thinking of making, stay or go. And the longer that conversation went on, the more I felt that the future might not be as happy as the past for me, if you like. And may have been okay. But at some point, you've got to make a call. And so I decided Stuff, the appeal with Stuff in the end was it was making a big push to knock off the Herald in the online news market in Auckland. It was building a kind of a big newsroom in a way that it hadn't had before, with specialist reporters and rounds and all that sort of thing. And it felt like a pretty exciting thing to come and get involved with. And I thought, I will box up my happy days at RNZ and take all those happy memories with me, shed a few tears on the way out the door. But the appeal was to have a few years in this other form of journalism that I knew nothing about, which was the digital world.
And how did you find that transition? I didn't realise it was such a long time with one organisation.
It was sort of hard and easy in that essentially I was going back to where I was at the start in the Auckland Star. It was the written word and quite short news stories. And you didn't have the opportunity to do all that creative stuff that you get to do in broadcasting. So I missed some of that creative stuff for a while, but I also kind of relished just the simplicity of taking a story and structuring it in simple plain English and print, if you like, and putting it out like that. You could actually get more done in a way. So it was sort of refreshing.
And in terms of that team they built, there was a lot of very kind of credentialed journalists joined at that time. How was the that sort of building something new and having a crack at the Royal New Zealand Herald, this very powerful incumbent, through those years?
Yeah, so the strategy apparently paid off. I'm not an expert on how they measure things, but they got the audience that they were looking for in Auckland, and I think it is still up there thanks to the strength of the website. As media changed over the years, I think the environment I walked into started to change quite quickly. When I went there, there were still the community newspapers, the Western Leaders, the Manukau Courier, each with their own office, each with their own small teams of reporters, which provided a kind of a depth and a breadth of coverage that was unique in Auckland. And as the financial screws starting to tighten, those sort of structures were wound back, those offices closed. The papers are still there, but they're fed from a central pot. So I guess the big thing that I walked into did contract a bit over the years, but really the job remained the same, and the appeal was the same, being able to do the America's Cup, which was a passion of mine on the side whenever it came round, and Auckland politics and issues and transport and so on, that remained the same right through.
I mean, I'm sure that's true, but it must have changed dynamically somewhat with the arrival of a particular main character, and that's Wayne Brown as mayor, who had... I mean, I appreciate what you said earlier about the relationship between our elected representatives and reporters, but surely you must concede that he's got a particularly specific one, especially with yourself and Simon Wilson.
Yeah, it's been interesting for me after 45 years as a journalist, as I was then, with the election of Wayne Brown. I've basically had a year where I've kind of had to relearn everything that I knew and did about dealing with politicians. I followed Wayne Brown on the election trail. He was solidly elected in the same kind of numbers that Phil Goff was before him. It's a fact he doesn't like to hear, that the same number of people voted for him as for Phil Goff. But he came into the job, he had a brilliant campaign. He had really top-flight campaign strategists. They picked the right messages, they hit the buttons, and it's broken, I'll fix it, said all the right things and swept into power. Following him on the trail, it was pretty obvious that aside from the merit of his campaign, that he as an individual didn't really have a good grasp of what was really going on inside the council, and not a good grasp of how he as mayor could deal with some of those issues. And so I was fascinated when he was elected. That was actually the point where I was probably thinking of resigning anyway. Seemed like a nice, tidy moment. New council, turn 65, get your pension, off you go. Someone else picks it up. But I was fascinated to try and see how somebody like that operated as mayor of Auckland. As it turned out, we had no relationship at all, pretty much, from the day he was elected. I got to cross paths with him occasionally at a council meeting, but it was a year before I got a sit-down interview with him, and he clearly doesn't have a lot of time for me, I guess because I've been critical. His office tells me that through whatever monitoring they do, I'm by far the most negative journalist on matters to do with Wayne Brown, which, I don't know, should you worry about that, or is it a badge of honour? I don't know. So it's really been interesting the mayor is a very important figure, but trying to work out a way of covering the issues in Auckland without access to the mayor. And part of that is realising that actually what happens in Auckland is not what the mayor says. It's the majority of the councillors who decide something. So it's been a fascinating year having an almost hostile relationship with the mayor's office for the first time ever, and still trying to cover big stuff that's going on in Auckland around that.
There's a thesis that's kind of gone round a bit that was sort of exemplified in the recent Metro cover story, which asked the question, has Wayne Brown gone woke? Obviously having some fun with it, because I don't think that's ever, he's not going to get convicted of that in any court of law. But do you buy the idea that he has been a more interesting and complex mayor than the guy who campaigned in terms of his political choices, if not his behaviour?
Yeah. So what's been interesting to watch is he came in with these fixed positions on pretty much everything. He puts a lot of value in his own knowledge, his own experience, and the merit of his views on things. He came in, all of the directors of all of the council agencies were going to be gone within weeks. He was going to get rid of them all. He was going to have the vehicle trade off the city ports within 2 years, and the port gone a short time, a decade after that. He came in with really big ideas that were never going to happen. I think initially he aligned himself, or some councillors aligned themselves with him, and I think what's been interesting to watch is over a period of that year, he's learned a lot. He's learned which councillors can actually make things happen, which councillors have solutions to problems rather than just talking about the problems. All of these agencies that he was going to defund and get rid of the directors, he has, from contact with them and actually learning about what they do, come to speak quite highly of them and getting on well with the chairman or the chair people of the boards of those agencies. So to his credit, he has adapted and he has realised that a lot of these things aren't as he saw them, aren't as simple as he saw them, and are going to take a lot more work to happen. And he is tackling big things like trying to get a city deal with Auckland and big structural stuff, which is all commendable. But I think he's still not nailed learning how to build a consensus easily around a council table. I think he's making that harder for himself than it should be.
As we came in, you talked about the fact that his office sort of seemingly habitually briefs the Herald before they brief staff, and that seems to be this sort of emerging trend that, and we've seen Winston Peters this week making some fairly extraordinary statements about media bribery and referring to the media almost as the opposition in a particular way. Wayne Brown doesn't do that precisely, but he does some stuff that we wouldn't have expected from the office prior to that. How damaging are these kind of norm-breaking behaviours, do you think?
Look, I don't know whether it's hard to quantify with Wayne whether it's damaging or not. I mean, it's certainly not new in politics that a politician or a party will favour one media outlet over another, either because one outlet is seen to be more tuned in to the voter base that the politician is trying to get to, or it could be because they just want to snub the other one for whatever reason. The risk with that always, and it's not unique to Wayne Brown or necessarily to politics, if you're giving one media organisation the jump on all the others kind of get their noses out of joint. So it doesn't, the gain that you get on one, are you losing it by, upsetting the others and perhaps getting more negative coverage from the others than you would get? And look, to be fair, in earlier terms, I've probably had a relationship that's allowed me to get the jump on some things. So, what goes around comes around. I'm now not the favoured one. You have to work a lot harder to catch up or to try and be there at the same time via a different route. I don't know that the public really want to be worrying about that. Which media company is getting ahead of the other one and who's got the better relationship. We all manage to get the stories out. You just have to live with what you're dealt.
Fair enough. So today is literally your final day in the job. I spoke to your colleague at the Herald, Simon Wilson, who was at the last council meeting you attended. Apparently, the tributes flowed not from Wayne, but from most of the rest of them. How do you feel at the moment? How did you feel hearing that, and what will you sort of miss, do you think, about all this?
Yeah, I mean, it was quite unsettling, I guess, to sit at a council meeting where you've always been in the gallery, you've been watching the show, and you take away and report what you want from it. To be hearing from people around that table their thoughts on, what you might have done over the years or a particular story. So that was an unusual experience. It was interesting watching the mayor's reaction to those comments being made. At one point, I think Desley Simpson said something about she would hold a comment until it was after question time or something, and Wayne, in his inimitable style, said, half the questions seem to be about some reporter who's leaving, which provided me with some amusement. Guy. Yeah. But that's just the way he talks. I didn't take that particularly one way or the other. Yeah, I guess everybody, whether they're a journalist or a teacher or someone who makes coffee for people in a cafe, likes to think that what they do is adding somehow to the world or people's lives around them. So, if somebody says that from time to time, I guess it, helps you think that some of it was worthwhile for somebody.
Wow, you're really pouring it on in typical Todd Niall style. I think it's been so great to have you up here, and I know I speak for my colleagues and the industry more broadly. In terms of the contribution you've made has been pretty amazing on a beat that hasn't always been easy or given the sort of resourcing it's deserved, but an amazing career, and thank you so much for coming on The Fold to talk about it.
Thanks, Duncan, and may the spin-off keep doing the great job that it does. Thank you.
That was The Fold, brought to you by our partners at O Media, making brands unmissable and public spaces better across Aotearoa. Huge thanks to O Media for sponsoring this episode of The Fold and enabling us to make unmissable connections with Kiwis.
K-pop to me means more than just listening to music. It's learning to be myself.
The spin-off's new documentary, K-Pollies, follows 3 Pacific youth obsessed with K-pop. In a one-off documentary, see what they've found in Korean pop culture and how they bridge it with their own.
When you start dressing, looking different, everyone side-eyes you. But in K-pop, they're just like, no, like celebrate yourself.
Watch K-Pollies today at thespinoff.co.nz/videos. Made with the support of New Zealand On Air. The Spin-off Podcast Network.